It's recording now. Okay. Hold on. Can you see the presentation now? Yeah, I guess.
Yep.
Good. Thanks. Well, let's start with teaching. Okay. We focused on learning variables, learners variables. We also took a look at the internal and external factors that could deter or benefit teaching and learning. We also discussed the perceptions and insights into the L1, the L2 learning theories for both L1 and L2, and also acquisition theories. And last time we started with crashing, if you can remember. So to introduce the nature of grammar, it would be good to take a look at a previous task you carried out a couple of weeks ago on the teacher's roles. And I was checking Harmer's paper again, you know, his work. And the ideas people have on teaching and teachers actually might determine, you know, our conceptions of the profession. And Harmer employs a couple of metaphors to describe what we teachers do. He starts by stating that we're seen as actors, you know. Teachers feel they're always on stage. We do not suffer from personality disorder, but discriminate situations. And one of them is the professional one, in which we are in front of people, you know, on the spotlight, and sometimes with a speech, or even preaching, or writing on the board. But we have this personality, which is a professional one, because we want to show face and we want to save it as well. So we have this professional identity. We are not pretending, we are not acting, we just discriminate, we just separate roles. And inside this metaphor, we play a couple of different roles, you know, that we have already discussed. It's very interesting because we need skills for being in front of people, you know, and we have also discussed those skills. Another metaphor that Harmer comes up with is the orchestral conductor. We direct conversations, we state the rhythm, set the pace, the tone, the transition between one task and another, timing, planning. We instruct movement in the classroom, you know. So to a certain extent, we might be seen as orchestral conductors in the sense of the roles we play in a classroom. There is another metaphor that refers to gardeners, because we plant the seed of a student. This is very interesting, and I found a quotation for sharing with you all today in the following slide that has to do with the enhancement of critical thinking and self-discovery. Of course, we have our own perceptions of our profession. Yeah, we work collectively in a collaborative manner in order to understand our job, to understand the processes, the complexity of the art of teaching. And we also have our own ideas toward teaching and teachers. And those perceptions have been edified and constructed according to the experiences we had previously faced. Now, this is the quotation I found relevant for you. Many trainers are fond of quoting on the prophet of Khalil Gibran. If the teacher is indeed wise, he does not bid you enter the house of his windows, of his wisdom, sorry, but rather leads you to the threshold of your own mind. In that sense, well, we need to take into consideration, our own construction of identity in our style of teaching. The relationship between teaching and learning might be determined by our interaction in society, our culture, our context, the situations that happen in a group of people, a community of practice. And it's all too easy, and it's harder to do it, but we should focus on what students can achieve rather than what we want to teach. And to cover those students' expectations, well, we have two different paradigms of teachers. On the one side, we have this group leadership according to the students' expectations and according to the literature on the roles of teachers. Dorney, who's a scholar, a very well-known scholar on motivation, demotivation, emotions in the classroom, processes of language learning and language acquisition, has identified that group development practitioners are expected to be leaders and are expected to provide with direction for the students to learn. So this has also impact on the personality we have, because yeah, we could be actors, but leadership cannot be built, but is a gut feeling, it's second nature. And according to the literature, this is a characteristic we need to possess in order to be autocratic. And let's face the music, in the Mexican context, most of the times students expect the teacher to be the guider, to be the leader, for them to feel confident, secure, and comfortable in the classroom and for learning as a whole. So a lot of responsibility is placed on the teacher. And you have seen that, in the public education system, of course, elementary school, senior high school, junior high school, okay, kindergarten. Of course, this is not the rule, right? We have these perceptions and expectations for democratic teachers on the other side, where students are involved in the process of decision making. This is this could be seen more in private institutions, with kindergarten students. It requires, of course, a lot of effort and organizational skills. For democratic teachers to be effective, they need to build rapport. Okay, they should understand the level of knowledge of the students, the level of English, in this case, the matter and the subject matter, and the skills. Well, we have these two different emerging categories of teachers that could have impact on the way they teach grammar and on the way they teach the full skills of the language and vocabulary and pronunciation and the whole process of teaching. We have already explored the different roles that we teachers are expected to play and our own personal expectations of teaching and learning processes. So that reflection is going to be beneficial for introducing the nature of English grammar. The general reasons of the nature of English grammar, both from the linguists domain and from the educational sphere, and some particular reasons regarding individualities, personal characteristics, but the pedagogical implications of such reasons of the nature of grammar should include in the agenda learning styles, types of learners, internal and external factors that could affect learning and acquisition, and of course, paradigms, methods, methodologies, approaches, strategies for effective teaching to take place. So it's a combination of well, what we explored in Unit 1, couple of topics, couple of topics, if you can remember, that were developed progressively, step by step, in a systematic manner, and now the teaching side of the process. Now, to introduce the nature of grammar, it would be good for us to state what grammar is. This question might have no sense, and I'll let you know why. Because we have different perceptions of grammar according to our schemata or previous experiences, our own ideas or training, the first contact we had with grammar. So everything has influenced our perceptions of grammar. I personally love grammar, you know. I can still remember that the moment I had to take a test, I was directly to the grammar section because I felt that I was capable of doing it, and I really enjoyed all the grammar exercises. Well, we all had particular and individual processes for digesting grammar and for having our own concept of grammar. We're gonna go over a definition in a minute, but before stating what grammar is, I want you to focus on how some people learn grammar and how some people teach grammar. This is an example. Let's place ourselves in a foreign language learning context, and I guess we are all familiar with that context. We have a situation between a teacher and students. This is what happens, okay? Check this out. Teacher, we're studying English. Class, are we studying English? Yes, we are. We're using a new book. Are we using a new book? No, we aren't. We're making questions. Are we making questions? And the drill continues and continues for a few more turns, okay? But after this practice, after the drill, a girl turns to the teacher and asks, "We're going outside for recess?" Wow, that might be disappointing for both the teacher and the classmates. Perhaps not for the student, because she might not be aware of the fact that her failure to invert the subject with the operator had an impact on the drill, you know, on the practice that was previously done in the classroom. So the teacher says, well, okay, next time we're going to practice more. We're going to to continue with the drill. Okay, so this is one way to present grammar by means of repetition, modules, in drills. Okay, but research has shed light on the finding that states that this could be beneficial for the short-term memory, for taking the test, you know, for communicating in the context, in the immediate context. Yeah, of course. But hardly ever did they find that this was meaningful learning, that this was contextualized learning, and that could have an impact on students' lives, students' cognitive processes, and what some people call meta language. Repetition is really good for specific purposes, of course. I can tell you that by experience, you know, repetitions and drills set the foundations of my grammar regarding L2, you know, or L1, L2, L3. But we all faced and go through different processes. This is just one example, and I think we all are familiar with this situation, yeah, or understand it at least. Now, one definition of grammar could be that one provided what the linguistics field stated. Grammar is a set of rules for combining words to express meaning. Okay, good so far. However, the way grammar is presented might determine students' perceptions of grammar. On the one hand, grammar could be seen as a monster that makes students feel bored, nervous, or sleepy. You know, it depends on how you present it, on how they were introduced to grammar. And also teachers, you know, teachers might feel nervous when they need to teach grammar, or anxious about what they're going to teach. Because, you know, it's complex to deal with grammar, okay? It's a system. Here we have that grammar has a main goal, which is for the students to achieve a high level of communicative grammatical competence. And this communicative competence is going to be explored at the end of Unit 4, because I think it summarizes the teaching and learning processes of every single dimension of language. And that's why I think I'm gonna place it at the end as the main goal of teaching and learning languages. They achieve the ability to use and understand structure in a variety of situations spontaneously. That's the main goal of grammar. So we have here use and understanding, and that's, you know, a new dimension for teaching and learning grammar. Not only is it the focus on rules, form, structure, construction, but also on meaning, and more importantly, on use. That is semantics and pragmatics. In order to achieve these two goals, you know, for communicative competence, we can actually see that there are two different approaches to grammar. One of them is the deductive approach that can be found in Thornbury's paper, page 29. Or you could also, well, you read the approach with Freeman, right? In which students are given the rule Okay, they are given the rule so that the way a language should be used, so that they can see how the language should be used. Okay, this is the prescriptive grammar. Language is prescripted so that students can know how it should be used. This is very beneficial for certain situations, certain contexts. For academic language to be developed, for example, the context in which we are learning English, remember that we explore different reasons for people to learn languages and for people to learn languages as a BA. An example of this deductive grammar approach could be the process of writing a response paper, where focused on structure, you know, and following guidelines, is looking for specific outcomes, such as the use of high register of language, rules of punctuation, a formatting for a quotation marks, for paraphrasing, for citing, for a number of procedures that have to do with academic writing. So you're presented instructions, you follow the guidelines, and then, well, you look for the content of your thoughts. On the other hand, you have an inductive approach. Okay, an inductive approach in which students infer the rule. The rule is not given. Well, they refer to rules, but then we will see how Lasen-Freeman refers to this as form, and not only form, but as constructions, to include lexis, vocabulary, such as collocations and morphology and syntax. Well, students infer the rule here, and this is what people refer to as descriptive grammar. Description of how speakers of a language actually use the language, and language in use emerged from this approach. You can, I guess you're familiar with language in use in the term when you're taking certification exams or exams at the School of Languages. We have this section of language in use in which we need to be able to identify and discriminate how language is actually used in specific situations. The main goal of the inductive approach for grammar to be introduced is to achieve accuracy and fluency, to focus on form, but also on production. And we can see phonemics and graphemes as well, that is oral discourse and written discourse, for achieving communicative competence. So to a certain extent, the inductive approach is more related to a communicative branch. Now take a look at this chart I designed for summarizing ideas towards grammar and procedures. It's kind of a mixed approach. It's kind of a summary of an eclectic approach to presenting grammar. In the middle, you have freer practice, okay, where students are given the opportunity to play with grammar, to use it, and for mistakes to be made. Here you have controlled practice, moduling, And this has got implications, okay? How can we carry out this control practice? And remember that we stopped last session with Krashen's hypothesis of the monitor hypothesis, right? And how monitoring could be adapted to certain learners and their characteristics. So this could be one of the implications for presenting grammar. There are some controversial points regarding Krashen and the approaches we're going to check for grammar. Okay, so it's important to link previous knowledge from our course with now the practice of teaching, which has got also learning content related. Content related learning. Now, you have moduling here, you have guided student-centered practice, okay? And that means that the input should be meaningful by going to personal experience, topics which are related to the learner, to the person we are trying to explain the grammar point, such as family, goals, context. Relevancy is needed for a grammar to be understood, okay, and to be thought and to be learned. On the other hand, we have fluency. And fluency was suggested by Lasen-Freeman by means of including in the teaching agenda dimensions such as form, structure, grammar, meaning, and use of the language. So for Lasen-Freeman, rules become reasons, you know, because according to her, every single rule regarding language has got an exception. And that's why she rather goes for reasons and constructions. It gives the opportunity for learners to infer, okay, to reason and comprehend language in a different manner. Now, Lasen-Freeman comes up with a proposal for a three-dimensional framework that includes form, semantics, and pragmatics. Okay, in short, real communication which is meaningful. Let's go back to the question, what is grammar? Here we have a three-dimensional framework introduction for grammar. Let's read the first one. It is a system of lexicogrammatical patterns that are used to make meaning in appropriate ways. Okay. And then we have a three-dimensional grammar framework. Why? Because we have form with patterns, we have meaning semantics, and we have appropriate ways, which has to do with the cultural dimension of language, which is fundamental, the contextual dimension of using the language, you know, which has to do with the pragmatics. We have another one, morphosyntactic, that is both lexis and sentences, as well as lexical patterns, collocations, prepositions, particles, to focus on form, on reading and writing, that is phonemic features and graphemic features, patterns for pronunciation, patterns for writing, lexical and grammatical meaning, semantics, and the social context, the linguistic discourse, code text, that is the use of the language, what we know as language in use. You have already read this three-dimensional framework. Let's summarize it in the following chart. This is the three-dimensional grammar framework by Lasen-Freeman, in which we can find first and foremost forms. Okay, what she describes as constructions. They are patterns, of course, okay? They are patterns, but they are formed by designing our own models as students, okay? We provide with reasons on how language works. And here there is something very interesting. On the one side, some scholars believe that L1 plays a paramount role for dimensioning L2 grammar. And this, of course, has to do with the language acquisition device we have explored. So instead of facing this, let's say, interferences between L1 and L2, according to linguists, L1 could be beneficial to prepare or activate the language acquisition device in order to understand that there is another system that shares commonalities, but more importantly, has differences, you know. Well, according to Lasen-Freeman, learners go over grammar by discriminating facts, options, and rules. They actually divide the facts by the elements of grammar that can be changed. They go for options when they have the opportunity to replace something and the meaning changes. And rules, of course, for the graphemic and phonetic affairs. Those are the ways in which learners usually structure grammar, whether in a conscious way or unconsciously. Now, she includes the dimension of meaning, that is semantics, what the word means, what the sentence means, or what it tries to refer to, and she included the dimensional side of the use of the language, pragmatics, that is, the inclusion of the context and the role of context when provided with meaning, specific situations. When is the sentence used? Why is the word used? In which moment? In which manner? They are both, you know, interweaving. They are the three dimensions are interweaving. It's not that in a single lesson, grammar lesson, you're going to cover the three dimensions of grammar. No, it doesn't work that way. It's not. Lasen-Freeman talks about grammar as a dynamic system. And that means that language is alive. Okay, there are patterns, there are forms, there is a structure. Yeah, okay. There is construction. However, you know, grammar and language itself is dynamic. It's constantly changing. And of course, that has to do with the inductive approach, where the use and the meaning have a relevant role when learning and teaching grammar. So when Lasen-Freeman refers to a dynamic system, she states that we shouldn't aim at covering the three dimensions in a single unit, in a single lesson, in a single task, but that we need to understand that grammar learning and teaching is a process that follows steps. Now, an example of this three-dimensional framework, we have possessives on your right, on your left, sorry. On the left, you have the form, okay, the pattern, apostrophe S or S apostrophe. That is the written form. Now, what about the pronunciation? Well, for phonemics, you also have that sometimes you're gonna have the ending Z, the ending Z, or the end Z. So It varies, it changes, the form changes, the pattern changes. Okay, has different patterns. For the meaning, you have different kinds of meaning. Possession, carries back, description, carries surname, amount, well, I can think of any. Relationship, Betty's husband, part, whole, origin, Mexican traditions, but I don't know. But indeed, you have these 6 different meanings for the apostrophe s possessive. Now, what about the use? The apostrophe s versus possessive determiner. Apostrophe s versus the definite article the. Okay, the wife of Pedro, Pedro's wife. The apostrophe s versus compound nouns. Okay, teaching and learning, you know, that could be a compound teaching learning process. I don't know if it's still current, but anyways, think of an example. Now, phrasal verbs, okay, which for some scholars, this is supposed to be lexis. This is supposed to be vocabulary. Well, according to the three-dimensional grammar framework, this is grammar indeed, because we have form, meaning, and use. For example, form, the pattern, verb, particle, or verb, particle, preposition. Verb, particle, get by. Verb, particle, preposition, get by, on. We have separable and inseparable phrasal verbs. Get over, or a look forward to, right? Inseparable, we have a separable such as well, I can think of an example. So we have the patterns, stress and junction. For meaning, we have literal meaning, come in, figurative meaning, get by, on, multiple meanings, get at. So we have this dimension, and we have the dimension of the use of grammar. For informal discourse, or discriminate the formal discourse, find out, discover. A principle of dominance. So here, context, use, and specific situations need to be explored. The role of, you know, the person who's going to teach grammar is to identify what the challenge of your group is. Now, regarding the implications of you know, the approaches to grammar, we have that learners do not learn constructions one at a time. It's a process. They don't cover the 3 dimensions of grammar in a single session. It's also a procedure. It's systematic. Errors will be made even though learners seem to have mastered a particular construction, a particular grammar point. This could be seen in the previous example I just showed you, where regardless of the drills and repetitions, students keep on making mistakes, you know, because this is the process of learning. Let's think of the verb to be. You teach the verb to be, I am, you are, he is, she is. And let's say students face a different situation where they need to accommodate, but they're not ready, and they need to provide with age. What they would say, I have, instead of I am. So errors will be made continuously. You know, this is the process of learning, teaching and learning. And of course, you need to follow a couple of strategies and procedures to continue recycling and continue practicing. Now, learners rely on the knowledge and experiences they already have. This has to do with the language acquisition device. You can remember the L1 and L2 acquisition theories and L1 and L2 learning theories that we explored. On the one hand, for some scholars, previous knowledge, and here you have L1 as previous knowledge and experiences, has impact on L2 systems, L2 grammar. For some others, it actually produces interference, a battle between L1 and L2 grammar. And we check that with one of the L1 and L2 acquisition theories, if you can remember. That's why it's important to link previous knowledge, previous theory with the practice and with the teaching and learning processes. Also, the hypothesis by Krashen are going to be questioned, and you will have to come up with conclusions. Different learning processes, such as, sorry for the spelling mistake, pattern recognition. It's not Peter, no, it's pattern recognition, association, and discrimination are responsible for different aspects of language. But how can we enhance the processes to take place? Pattern recognition, association, discrimination. Well, by the applications of the approaches in the classroom. One of them might be Krashen's comprehensible input, okay? However, we need to be very critical and sensible in order to detect the following elements in our context here in Mexico, at least. Foreign language classrooms in Mexico, to what extent we can work with a comprehensible input, 3 hours a week, 1 hour a day, people full of energy, 45 people in a single classroom. Can real communication exercises take place there? Can take place there, the learner variables, remember, children or adults. And the need for corrective feedback, it's another implication for the classroom. Some students really need to be corrected at the moment for avoiding fossilization, while some others need to be provided with feedback in a systematic manner at the end of the session by means of writing, by a more personal approach. And that actually leads the presentation to the approaches to grammar instruction. By deciding and selecting a grammar approach for instruction, we're going to be covering these different elements that need to be taken into account. We need to cover, and that's why Unit 1 was so relevant for us, because now that we know the expectations, now that we know the perceptions of language, how people look at language, how the different internal and external factors might influence teaching and learning, we need to know the approaches for teaching grammar first and foremost, and then for the 4 skills. One of the most popular approaches is the PPP approach. It's the so-called PPP that stands for presentation, practice, and production. According to this approach, which is a traditional one, explicit teaching of grammar rules is to be presented at the very beginning, okay? So presentation is going to be the first stage of the approach. Then practice and repetitive drills are to be done. Learners are in control during practice, less fear of an incorrect answer. This is freer practice. Then explicit instruction results in improvements, hopefully, in learning the targeted structures. Practice drills have little relevance to using grammar effectively. 1 point of opportunity here. Okay, this is very useful. You know, I can tell you that from my own experience. Presentation, practice, and production works. It's very systematic. However, the different approaches, they're more communicative related approaches. There isn't the right kind regarding the approach for teaching grammar, but you know, they complement each other. And of course, the most important thing is to focus on the situation, on the group, on the students you are to teach. Okay, then you're going to decide whether you go for a PPP approach or for a focus on form approach or for grammaring by Lasen-Freeman, or a different approach according to the needs that you detect and according to the challenge of your students, the learning challenge, whether form, meaning, or use. What is it that they need to go over first? This is the learning challenge we need to detect. Now, regarding the presentation, practice, and production, here you have a brief description that you have already read with Harmer and with Lasen-Freeman, okay? Presentation of the grammar point first. Sometimes, you know, by looking at the commonalities between L1 and L2, but more importantly to the differences between them, between the systems. The practice includes the grammar construction using oral drills or written exercises, and finally production, in which students are given the opportunity for communicative use of the grammar to promote automatization and accuracy. Okay, so drills do work, they do. Repetitions are functional. Okay, once they become automatic, accuracy takes place. And accuracy, it's a fundamental part for communicative competence. This is another approach, and it's more communicative or meaning-based, focused on form. We can find a couple of examples for approaches regarding a focus on form, such as task-based or content-based instruction, where we find different modules such as topic-based, shelter, etc. You're going to check them in a different course. Of course, it's going to be the current methods and approaches for language learning and teaching. But we need to go for the foundations here. Communication is one of them. Learners are primarily engaged with communication rather than the grammatical constructions. Okay. 3 different stages of input are regarded in this approach. Enhancing the input. If you remember Krashen's hypothesis of comprehensible input, this has to do with guiding and providing with information which is challenging for them, but that avoids frustration feelings. Input flooding, okay, more input, and input processing. I guess you have already gone over this. Next. Another approach, the approach suggested by Lasen-Freeman. Grammar instructions needs to promote awareness in students. Sorry for the spelling mistake again, it was very sleepy. Grammar instructions need to promote, awareness in students. It also needs to engage them in meaningful production. The proper goal of grammar instruction should be grammaring. But what is grammaring? Grammaring is the ability to use constructions accurately, meaningfully, and appropriately. And we have the three-dimensional grammar framework here. Form, meaning, use. Lasen-Freeman decided to add ing to the word grammar to shed light, actually, on the three different dimensions: structure, semantics, and pragmatics. And I think it worked. You know, grammaring came out with the possibility of identifying the learning challenge students need to work on, and the conclusions we can have at the end of the exploration of different approaches and the nature of grammar is that the term grammar is ambiguous. It is ambiguous because everybody has a different perception of grammar. It depends on your previous experiences, on your background, on the contact you had with grammar, and the personality types. Some people love grammar, some others hate grammar. Grammar is very complex. Yeah, for some people it's a dynamic system. For some others is a carefully structured and systematic machine. But we have different definitions of grammar, and hence we have different approaches to teach and learn grammar. Okay, there is no the right kind. There is not a correct approach and an incorrect approach. Both, or all the approaches we're exploring here are effective for specific situations. So an eclectic thought would be really beneficial. Grammar includes both words and sentences in a structured manner and in a form of a pattern and sequences. But those words and sentences and structures and patterns together are called constructions. And this is something Lasen-Freeman came up with, and I think it's quite suitable to understand what grammar is. By constructions, she included how to use words, how to use sentences, what they mean, and when to use them, and of course the reasons why we use such words or sentences in a specific situation. To sum up all those elements, we have constructions, and I think it's very accurate. I'm currently finishing up my thesis on applied linguistics, and I also employ the term of construction for the ways people learn grammar. Grammar is about form, but more importantly, it is about what the forms mean, when and why those forms are used. And finally, it is important for teachers to anticipate the learning challenge for a given grammar point, whether use, meaning, or form, because by doing so, activities are going to be accurate, are going to be contextualized, your tasks are going to be meaningful, you are going to employ timing properly, and I think you're going to follow a sequence for introducing any grammar point. This is the summary of the nature of grammar. You can find the books we've been in touch with, Crystal, Harmer, Krashen, and Lasen-Freeman. You have already read those. Well, I guess we can end the presentation here. And I would like to listen to your questions or comments or suggestions, you people. Do you have any comments? I'm listening to you.
Teacher?
Yeah, go ahead.
When you talked about the deductive and deduction and induction to teaching grammar, the deductive one is for advanced students, right?
Thank you, Alex, for your question, for your comment. Well, the levels of language need to be taken into consideration when teaching. And this is something we actually discussed in Unit 1, if you can remember. So I think your question is quite relevant because this is the moment in which we need to be really critical and to say, okay, if we have a deductive approach for grammar to take place, students need to be given rules. Now, are you going to give rules to a child? Well, wouldn't make a lot of sense, right? Prescriptive grammar is the explanation of the forms a language should be learned. So here it is the moment in which you're going to discriminate. Okay, am I going to use deductive approach for a adults who want to communicate really fast? Or am I going to use a deductive approach to grammar for children who are, let's say, 6-year-olds? They are approaches and they have pros and cons according to your own teaching situation. I would say that a deductive approach might be suitable for students who want to know the language, but also want to know about the language. And to know about the language means that they need to develop this meta-language skill. For example, the use of guidelines, presenting the grammar, and then you start constructing your own approach as a teacher, and you say, okay, these people should be taught by means of a deductive approach. So I think I'm gonna go for the PPP approach in this lesson, okay? And then you say, well, now I'm going to move to grammaring because I think they need to be challenged by means of the use of the structure, the use of grammar, So it's very interesting, and I appreciate it for your question, Alex, because you have paradigms at the top. You have paradigms regarding knowledge and the way we understand things, science, art, history, etc. Those paradigms are just like the patterns for society, such as positivism, constructivism, hermeneutics, etc. But then you have methodologies or methods. We have the grammar translation method for a, well, before those methods, we have, of course, learning theories, right? Learning theories that we explore. And then we have methodologies, audiolingual method, Suggestipedia, etc. The ones you are exploring at the moment in a different course. And after that, you have approaches, task-based learning, total physical response. And then you have approaches for each of these skills. But not only do you have approaches, but you have strategies. And then you start determining your teaching style in case Your goal is to become a teacher, of course. But if not, you start reflecting on the strategies you employed as a learner, the strategies that teachers use in order to use approaches, and how they could merge according to a specific context. So, just to sum up, sorry, a deductive approach could be beneficial for students who have got, let's say, a B2 level, okay, a B1 level, but it all depends on the circumstances and the situations of your lesson, okay? It's good for you to start questioning when to use a deductive approach, when to use an inductive approach, the benefits, the pros and the cons, and take responsibility of the potential consequences for each of the approaches. Okay. So I hope it got a little bit clearer for you, but thank you for your question, Alex.
Yes, teacher. Thank you.
Does anybody have a comment?
Yeah,
Max.
me, teacher, Max.
Thank you, Max.
You talked about the three-dimension framework, and this is very linked to the homework. How do you structure this framework initially? Does it have a particular structure, or I don't know. I don't have very clear what the structure is of this framework.
Thank you, Max. You're right. This framework is going to be employed in your task. It's going to be a complex task. Well, at least it's going to take time. What is the structure of the framework? Well, the origins of this framework have to do with form and with the idea that linguists had on grammar. That is, grammar was the analysis of the structures and forms regarding language in specific situations. Now, Diane Lasen-Freeman figured out that a definition of grammar could vary according to the needs of students. Because when we're talking about grammar, we're talking about form and patterns and structures, and that is right. You know, it's feasible, it's tangible. We can see that there are certain specifications and procedures for language to be used. But she decided to shed light on the meaning of grammar. That is, the meaning of words, the meaning of sentences. But not only meaning was important for her in the framework, but also once you have the meaning, let's say, the meaning of a phrasal verb, you need to know in which situations it would be suitable to use the phrasal verb. And that's part of your competence. That's part of communicative competence. To be able to decide the moments in which a sentence or a word is appropriate to be used. And that is actually a part of the third part of the dimension, which is the use of the language, pragmatics according to linguistics. This is the structure of the framework, but in which ways this is going to be beneficial for you if you decide to teach at any moment in your professional development? It's going to be useful because you can actually identify which of the three dimensions need to be worked out by means of identifying as well, you know, your students' needs, your students' zones of proximal development, your students' needs for comprehensible input, for scaffolding. Whether they want to communicate, you know, internationally, they want to go abroad, or they are planning to take a test, or they want to carry out a postgraduate degree, and then you focus on one of the dimensions for each of your tasks, let's say, and you design a series of activities and tasks for a lesson, and then design a lesson for a syllabus, and then the syllabus integrated to one of the theories for L1 acquisitional learning. So it's a dynamic process, the one you're going to follow as well, you know, when teaching grammar. But the nature of the framework is to shed light on the complexity. It's not only about rules. That's the main idea. Grammar is more than rules. Grammar is language in use. Grammar is context, society, culture. Okay, grammar is function, is meaning, is interaction. And that has to be represented in your tasks, in your teaching. Most of you were my students in strategies. Well, many of you at least. And I don't know if you can remember that the course was quite related to English. It was not properly English. You know, it was how to build your own strategies to learn English. But we did it by means of practicing the language. So the content was language related content. And we move around, if you can remember, we work with minimal pairs. We work, I don't know, maybe you remember or maybe you don't. We work with phrasal verbs, you know. And some teachers, you know, who teach the same learning experience say that phrasal verbs, you know, shouldn't be taught when you're beginners. However, the idea was not to focus on form, you know, was to actually shed light on different ways of looking at grammar and how you can actually design your own ways to go beyond memory related skills. Well, maybe that's going to be a hard example to present because it's been for about 3 years. But the idea of following this three-dimensional framework is to understand that grammar is complex, is ambiguous, and it depends on the particular context of teaching. So for employing and taking into account this three-dimensional grammar framework, not we, but professionals should have been studying the elements we explore in Unit 1 for it to be proper, to be contextualized, and to be employed. Okay, external and internal factors, variables, etc. It's gonna be fundamental for your task, Max. Yeah, it's gonna be a needed, and that's why I provided with the text for you to read. And well, I appreciate it for your question, and I hope it's a little bit clearer for you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Max. Thank you. Does anybody have a question or a comment? Well, I'm gonna stop recording. I'm gonna stop recording the session.